All right, today we're going to journey way, way back in time. We're going to meet two incredible groups of people, the very first people to walk the landscapes of southern Africa. We're here to uncover the distinct worlds of the San and the KhoiKhoi and the amazing legacy they created together.
So who were these people? Well, all the evidence, archaeological, historical, it all points to the San. They were the original inhabitants, absolute masters of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They thrived for thousands of years before anyone else showed up. And then a new group arrived, the KhoiKhoi, and they brought a completely different way of life with them.
Okay, so here's our plan. First, we'll get to know these first peoples. Then we're going to dive deep into the world of the San, and then do the same for the KhoiKhoi. After that, we'll look at what happened when these two worlds met, and finally, we'll uncover the incredible shared legacy they left behind.
So right at the heart of this whole story are two totally different ways of living. On one side, you've got the San, the expert hunter-gatherers, and on the other, you've got the KhoiKhoi, skilled pastoralists, which is just another way of saying they were herders.
Now this is super important. These were not just slightly different versions of the same group. Think of them as two completely separate, really successful blueprints for how to thrive. Each had its own unique way of doing things, their own technology, their own beliefs, their own societies, and it all played out on the exact same ancient landscape. So let's get into it.
All right, let's start with the first people, the San. Their entire way of life, their very existence, was built on this incredibly deep, super efficient understanding of the natural world. And you can really see this expertise in how they hunted. This wasn't just a quick chase. No way. This could be a multi-day mission. First, the San hunters would track their prey, sometimes for just incredible distances. Then they'd have to stalk it, getting super close without making a sound. But here's the real game changer, the poison on their arrows, which they often got from this tiny little beetle. After hitting the animal, they'd have to track it again, sometimes for days, waiting for that poison to work. And maybe the most important part of all, when it was all done, the reward was shared, equally, with the entire clan. Yeah, that idea of sharing, it was everything. It was the core of San society. They lived in these small, nomadic clans, think maybe 12 to 40 people. And in an environment that tough, cooperation wasn't just, a nice thing to do, it was absolutely essential for survival. Everybody was considered equal, no chiefs, no bosses. Instead, all the adults got together to make the decisions. And because they were constantly on the move, it just made sense not to have a lot of stuff. They had very few personal possessions.
Now, when it came to their spiritual life, the most important person in the community was the shaman. A shaman wasn't a chief or a political leader, but a spiritual healer and guide. And their main tool? Powerful trance dances. Through these dances, they could enter the spirit world to do all sorts of vital things like healing the sick, protecting the clan from evil spirits, seeing into the future, and even helping to make sure a hunt was successful.
Their connection to the animal world was just incredibly deep. But there was one animal that was special, that stood above all the rest, the eland. The eland is the largest antelope in southern Africa, and for the San, it was the most sacred animal. It was central to pretty much every major ritual you can think of, a boy's first hunt, a girl's coming of age, weddings, and especially those shamanic trance dances. In fact, a lot of their amazing rock art is basically a visual record of these spiritual journeys, showing their connection to the divine through the eland. Okay, let's hit pause on the San for a moment and shift gears completely. Let's talk about the KhoiKhoi, because here we see a totally different picture. This was a society where everything, and I mean everything, was organized around the animals they owned.
The first thing you notice, just the sheer scale. It's totally different. KhoiKhoi clans were way bigger than San groups. We're talking anywhere from 50 to 200 people. And the reason they could support that many people was because of their lifestyle as herders.
For the KhoiKhoi, wealth wasn't something you held in your hand. Wealth was livestock. They had herds of sheep and goats, but the really important animals were cattle. A man's importance, his status in the community, it was all measured by how many cattle he owned. His herd was his bank account. Now, these animals gave them a steady supply of milk, and they were used for trade, but eating meat was a huge deal. Cattle were just too valuable. They were only ever slaughtered for really special occasions, like a wedding or a funeral.
So you can see where this is going, right? This whole idea of wealth, of owning things, it created a completely different kind of society. Unlike the San, who were all about equality, KhoiKhoi society was hierarchical. There was a chief at the top. He, along with a group of other powerful senior men, made all the big decisions and sorted out any arguments. Power was definitely concentrated at the top.
So, okay,
we've got two very different groups. One is all about equality and hunting. The other is about hierarchy and herding. What happens when they start sharing the same land? Well, it's not a simple answer. The result was this really complex mix of conflict and cooperation.
When you get right down to it, the conflict was about one thing: resources. It was a direct competition. See, the KhoiKhoi needed huge areas of land for their cattle to graze. But that was the exact same land the San needed for the wild animals they relied on to hunt. And water, both groups desperately needed it. So you have a situation where what the livestock needed was the total opposite of what the wildlife needed. And that put the people who depended on them in direct conflict.
But it wasn't all conflict. It's more complicated than that. Yes, there was fighting, and a lot of Sand people were pushed into more remote areas. But there was also peace. Some Sandmen, with their amazing tracking skills, actually worked for the KhoiKhoi as hunters or guides. There was even intermarriage between the two groups. And after centuries of living side by side, the lines just started to blur. Eventually, these two distinct peoples came to be known by one name, the Khoisan.
So after all that, what's the lasting impact? What's the legacy of these two foundational cultures? Let's do a quick recap of what we've learned, and then I'll show you how their story endures today in a way that might really surprise you.
Okay, quick review of the big differences. Food. San were all about hunting and gathering. KhoiKhoi did that too, but added herding. Leadership. For the San, everyone decided together. For the KhoiKhoi, it was the chief and his senior men. Society. This means the San were egalitarian or equal, while the KhoiKhoi were hierarchical. And even their homes were different. The San had temporary shelter since they were always moving, while the KhoiKhoi built these big circular camps with their precious cattle safe in the middle.
These differences are fascinating, right? But their story? It didn't just fade away into history. Nope. In fact, a really profound piece of their legacy is hiding in plain sight, probably somewhere you would never think to look.
And here it is. This is the national coat of arms of South Africa today. Look closely at those two human figures right in the center. They're not just random drawings, they're exact copies of figures painted by a San shaman thousands of years ago. They come from a world-famous piece of rock art called the Linton Stone. Just think about that. The very first people of this land are right there, immortalized on one of the country's most powerful modern symbols.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, if a story this ancient, this important, is woven right into a national symbol like that, how many other stories from our most ancient ancestors, from all over the world, are hidden in the symbols we see every single day, the ones we might not even notice?